Yeah. Some of you just finished eating and it still hasn't settled in. I understand. Let's try that again. Rosh Chodesh Sameach. Yeah. And this is a very special Rosh Chodesh because this is the beginning of the counting of months. This shall be the first of months for you in the counting of the Holy Day calendar. All right, so it's a very, very special time. All right, so tonight we're going to have a Rosh Chodesh service for the month of Aviv, and that means that Passover is just right around the corner. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Oh yeah, you can get excited about that. All right, so for those of you that are online and are following along, welcome. And so this is a sort of a screen-driven or a slide-driven sort of presentation where we'll all participate. So except for the one slide announcing the new moon, everybody will be reading along or reciting along. You could do that at home as well. And it's very short, so if you want to stand, you could try to stand for the whole thing. It shouldn't take more than about 15, 20 minutes to do. So if you'll all rise, we'll begin with the sounding of the silver trumpet. Amen. Amen. Okay, so we're going to get the screen going, and we're going to all read together. From Psalm 51 and verse 15. Yahweh sefatai tiftach ufi yagid tehilatecha. Yahweh, open my lips, that my mouth declare your praise. May the expressions of my mouth and the thoughts of my heart find favor before you, Yahweh, my rock and my redeemer. From Numbers 10:10. Also in the day of your gladness, and in your appointed times, and in the beginnings of your months, you shall blow with the trumpets over your burnt offerings and over the sacrifices of your peace offerings, that they may be to you for a memorial before your Elohim. I am Yahweh, your Elohim. The Kiddushat Levanah. O Yahweh, our Elohim, and Elohim of our fathers, make this coming month one of good and blessing. Grant us long life, a life of peace, of good, of blessing, of sustenance, of vigor. A life marked by a reverence for you and a dread of sin. A life free from shame and reproach. A life of prosperity and honor. A life in which love of the living Torah and the fear of Elohim animates us. A life in which our heartfelt desires are fulfilled for good. In the name of Yeshua HaMashiach, Amen. He who performed miracles for our fathers and liberated them from slavery to freedom, may he quickly liberate us and gather our exiles from the four corners of the earth, and let us say, Amen. The new moon of the month of Aviv is today. May it prove to be good and fruitful for all 12 tribes of Yisrael. May the set-apart one, blessed be he, grant this Rosh Chodesh to us and to all his people, for life and peace, for gladness and joy, for deliverance and consolation, and let us say, Amen. Together. Blessed, praised, glorified, honored, and exalted be the name of the King of Kings, the set-apart one. Blessed be he, who is the first and the last, and beside him there is no Elohim. Extol him in the heavens, Yahweh is his name. Rejoice before his face. His name is honored beyond all blessing and praise. Blessed be his name, whose glorious kingdom is forever. Let the name of Yahweh be blessed forever and ever. From Isaiah 66, verses 22 and 23. For as the new heavens and the new earth that I make stand before me, declares Yahweh, so your seed and your name shall stand. And it shall be that from Rosh Chodesh to Rosh Chodesh, and from Shabbat to Shabbat, all flesh shall come to worship before me, declares Yahweh. Amen. Rosh Chodesh Sameach. All right. You may be seated. You may be seated. All right, so this is a very exciting time because we are headed right into the beginning of the Holy Day seasons. Okay, we begin, of course, here in the spring as we're heading into the very first observance, which is Passover and unleavened bread. Okay, yeah? In 2 weeks. All right, 2 weeks. Wednesday night, April the 5th. So we're going to be getting there in just 2 weeks. So I think it'd be good and praiseworthy to cover a few things in advance. So number one, as always, I want to remind you that you can still, from wherever you are right now, you can still make it. In other words, I don't want people to think, what is he talking about? I'm saved. Well, whatever. Okay? Look, some people struggle to believe they're going to make it into the kingdom. Some of you have those moments. As long as you're here, taking breath, having a pulse, some of you, I'm not sure. Okay, then you can still get there from here. He called you to succeed, not to fail. He called you because he knew that you could from this starting point. Not that you would. He also knows whether or not you will. But he called you because you could. And so let's just always be encouraged to know that as long as you have life and breath, it's not over. You have time in order to show him and demonstrate Deuteronomy 8:2 that it is well, first of all, that you're humbled, and secondly, that it's in your heart to keep his commands. All right, so just again, that strong encouragement to never give up, hold on tight, keep going, keep pushing forward, put one foot in front of the other and keep going. Because you can and you must get there, right? This is something, if you have to get to a place with that, it's a must. You must get there. All right, so I wanted to cover that. Okay, so a couple of things we know that are in the scriptures about Passover, and one of them is the idea of examining yourself. Now, I do want to first kind of interrupt that thought by saying on the YouTube channel, every time we're approaching feast, there is a playlist of the upcoming feasts. I think this one includes Passover as well as Purim and the Passover and unleavened bread. So, because people have contacted us wondering about information about Passover, we have a playlist. Okay, of all the teachings that I did related to that, all right? So you can go and listen to those. I highly recommend you do. You should understand, especially the Passover Q&A two-part teaching that basically answers the most common questions people have. That's why it's a Q&A, all right? So I would really, really encourage you to do that because we keep getting people calling with questions who, some of them, should know better. Should know better meaning they should know there's the teaching because they've heard me announce it over and over again. Others are brand new. They don't even know there's such a thing. And so, because here's the deal. I could bore you to tears and do that teaching every year and then do the one for Shavuot every year and the one for, I could do those things like didn't you get that in church? The standard seasonal teachings? I have no interest in doing that. They're available all the time, 24/7 on YouTube. And we separate them out in a playlist so you can find them. Okay, so as we approach different feasts, you'll see the playlist include those feasts. And it has the teachings that I did related to those feasts. Okay, so the Get Out the Leaven teaching, let's see, from Sinai to the Upper Room. There's a bunch of teachings in there, okay, that you may want to go ahead and listen to. So be diligent on your own to take, this I think is one of the most important things, take responsibility for your life. Take responsibility for things you need to do. Don't just sit around like a baby bird with your mouth open, okay? You need to go and get access to things that you know should be there. If you don't know where it is, ask somebody, because they'll tell you where the teachings are, especially the Shamish team. Ask the elders, ask me, ask Rabbi Tom. We'll tell you where these things are so you can find them. Okay, you shouldn't have to redo them. You should go listen to it. It's already available at your convenience. Okay? And so you can go through them as well. As a matter of fact, some of these things are so old, I almost couldn't find the notes for them because I was going to pull out some of the things from the Passover Q&A, which was done back in 2014. And so I had to go find notes, and my computer's been, I guess I've updated it and gotten new ones and stuff, that the oldest things I have on this computer are 2016. Thankfully, I had it in Dropbox, where I backed up everything. So there's where I was able to pull out the notes. All right. So I do want to cover a couple of things for you because there are some confusions to deal with this day that's coming up. And I'll probably mention these things again as we get closer. First and foremost, okay, there's two separate events. There's the performing of the Passover, which was what? The slaughtering of the lamb. And then there was eating of the Passover meal. Okay, now, this is where the confusion comes in for people. Well, probably multiple confusions because the calendar is already enough of a confusion for people. So, it says that you will take the lamb and you will slaughter it between the evenings on the 14th. Now, key words there is it's on the 14th, which means it's already the 14th. A lot of people get confused and try to do this at the end of the 13th going into the 14th. No, it's at the end of the 14th going into the 15th. Between the evenings is a very complex term that simply means afternoon. Okay, it just means afternoon. Don't get into between the evenings. Is that between like the noon and the sunset or this and that? Look, it's afternoon. Okay? That was the way they said afternoon, between the evenings. Now, we do know that Yeshua, hopefully we know, that Yeshua died at the same time that they slaughtered the lambs. What time did he die? 3 o'clock. Guess what? That's in the afternoon. What a surprise. Okay? So, first thing is, it's on the 14th going into the 15th. What's the 15th? The first day of unleavened bread. It's the holy day, right? The first holy day. There is no time, contrary to groups that I grew up with, etc., who teach differently, there is no time between Passover and unleavened bread. One leads right into the other. There isn't a day in between. There's no scriptural evidence for that. The reason why, by the way, those who will make the argument is because they have been lied to. Maybe that's too strong. No, it's not too strong. They've been lied to, maybe not on purpose, that the Last Supper was Passover. It wasn't. But if it was, then you have a day in between. And that's what they use to kind of make the argument. Oh, but Rabbi, it says that Yeshua said, they asked him where to go keep the Passover, and he told them to go get this room so they could keep the Passover. Yes, and he expected them to keep the Passover. He was not going to make it there because he was going to be the Passover. Also, verses like, with great desire, I desire to eat this Passover with you. Yes, he wanted to. Just like he said, Father, if possible, take this cup from me. But nevertheless, your will be done. He also said, I will not eat of this until I meet with you again in the kingdom. So he did not. Look, very simple, okay, as we kind of get into this. Generally speaking, you've heard me say this before, some of you, when you go to eat an animal, do you generally kill it first or second? Do you kill it before or after you eat it? See, he ate the meal. We call that the Last Supper. And then he was slaughtered when they killed the lambs. So it couldn't have been a Passover meal. By the way, in John, it says very specifically that the priests did not go into the palace lest they would be unclean and not be able to take the Passover because they hadn't had it yet. It was going to be that next night. Okay, this all is happening on the evening of the 13th going into the 14th. Okay, by 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the 14th, he was killed. And so the Last Supper is one of the few things I think that the Christians who put the New Testament Bible together named right. It was literally his Last Supper. It was not the Passover. Okay, with all respect to all those learned geniuses out there that think that otherwise, I'm telling you, just listen to the Passover Q&A and make the case for it, I think, in part 2, okay? So, that being said, there are two elements, the performing and the eating. Now, when they slaughtered the animal, they then did what? What did they do with the animal? They roasted it, the full animal, right? They roasted the entire animal. Anybody ever roast anything? A whole animal? It takes a little bit, right? It takes more than a minute. When did they eat the meal? When they finished cooking it. Okay? There's no time frame set in Scripture. It doesn't say you'll wait for sundown or it's on the 15th. It just says that then they ate the meal that night. Okay, that when they finished cooking it, whatever that took. Now, so if you're doing this in a congregation or assembly, there's a couple of things you should know. Number one, you should know that this meal would happen, if you think about Yeshua's day, probably no earlier than about 6 o'clock or so, 6, 7 o'clock, because it would have taken a while to prepare the animal to be eaten, to prepare it, to cook it and have it ready. And so you shouldn't be doing your Passover as a lunch, okay? It should be because remember, he was slaughtered at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It would be at least, I would say, at least 6, 6:30, 7, at whatever. Now, where you live, that may already be sundown. It may not. It doesn't matter. It does say, though, that the meal had some elements to it. What elements did it have? Unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Okay. And so that is mentioned, especially the unleavened bread is mentioned because the meal was going to cross into the first day of unleavened bread. So they had to already have that figured out and the leaven out of the house and ready to go. So that was part of the issue there. So that's why they had the unleavened bread. Because some people say, well, they had unleavened bread, which means it had to be after sundown. No, it means that they knew this was going to go beyond sundown as they were eating and reminiscing. Because one of the things traditionally, and we even see hints at in Scripture, is recounting the Exodus story. Well, that could take a while. It takes a while when we do it. Matter of fact, if you're using the Passover Haggadah or Haggadah that I put together, that's on our website on the Passover page, you know, we start at about 6:30. It's about 18 pages in the Haggadah. It's not until page 14 that you eat dinner. So all the other 14 pages, you're reading, and there's little songs to sing and things to do that are part of the Passover celebration that take a minute or two. And so we will likely be eating close to or after sundown by the time we actually eat. But that's neither here nor there, if you understand what I'm saying. But understand, Passover is not a single event. There's two events. The one event we don't do anymore because there's no temple. So as long as there's no temple, you can't do. So for all of you out there slaughtering your lambs and putting blood in your doorposts, knock it off, okay? Just stop. That's not scripturally correct. They only did that once, the doorpost thing. Now, the slaughtering the lambs, they only did when there was a temple. Without a temple, you're not doing the lambs. Okay, so what do? We have the meal, because the meal is a covenant renewal ceremony. It's a memorial to Sinai, to the Exodus, and then to Sinai. It's a covenant thing. And so the meal, we still do. And we will have some lamb at our meal as a memorial to the fact that there would be lamb. We're not going to offer one up. We're not going to put any blood into our post, but we will eat a little bit of lamb. Now, that's not required. Again, that's a tradition because, again, we're not actually doing the performing of the Passover. We're simply eating the meal. All right, so hopefully that's kind of starting to get us in the right direction. Okay, issue number 2. This is for only covenanted people. Now, it's not my job or yours to figure out if somebody's covenanted, because I've had people call me up, well, you know, my cousin's coming or my sister's coming, and I don't know if she's covenanted. That's not your problem, okay? There's always wheat and tares together. What matters is that I've instructed you, and then you've chosen to either be submissive to the instruction or not. That's what he's watching, okay? So it's for circumcised members only. As far as men 20 and over. Of course, you may have been circumcised younger than that, but I'm saying, but as far as men 20 and over, you need to be circumcised to eat the meal. You don't need to have anything to go to the first day of unleavened bread or any of the other holy days. This one is the only one that requires it. Read Exodus 12, starting around verse 43 or so, all the way to 48. And it makes it very clear that no stranger, son of a stranger, or any of those kind of things, no foreigner can eat of this meal unless they commit to covenant and get circumcised. Then they can eat of it, okay? And so that's an important piece of this. So for those of you that are watching and you have your own congregations that you go to, public Passovers are sin. They're breaking Torah. Okay, it's a breach of relationship. A public Passover, where you say, come one, come all, announce it in the local paper, put it on the radio, whatever it is, have it in some giant hotel somewhere, that's not scripturally correct. Okay? It breaches Torah. Exodus 12. Like I said, those verses are around 43 to 48, 49, something like that. It's very clear. Okay, so someone said, oh, but you're announcing yours? Yes, and we are having people come registered for our event that are part of MTOI, and they've heard me tell them that if they're not covenanted, they can't eat the meal. And we do have people come with their spouses that are not covenanted, and their spouses will come for the event, but they just won't come for the meal because they understand that that's just not what this is about, okay? Now, issue number 3. Getting out the leaven, okay? Getting your house free of leaven. Not the spiritual stuff right now. I'm just talking about the physical stuff. You got to listen to the Passover Q&A. You must know the difference between chametz and sior, okay? Okay, chametz or chametz. This is the things that are already leavened. Your cakes, your cookies, your breads, things that have already been made with the leavening. Okay, the sior is more like the starter piece. It's used to do the leavening, like the starter piece of a sourdough. I had somebody recently say to me, well, can I take my sourdough piece and put it in the shed, which is really not part of my house? And oh my gosh, it literally, I'm telling you, the sourdough piece is the thing that absolutely has to go. Okay? So let's make sure we understand that. And it's not just one person that asks these kind of questions. Lots of people ask these questions. Now, the leaven is not something that you play. Some of the Jews play this game. I'm not proud of it as a Jew that they do this, where they basically write a little bill of sale and sell all their leaven to the rabbi, and the rabbi owns it, so it's not really theirs, and then they buy it back, I don't know, for like $1 or whatever they do. At the end of it, no, look, this stuff is not supposed to be yours. It's not supposed to be in your house. Listen to the teaching, though, okay? Well, Rabbi, I do a lot of baking, and I've got these huge jars or bags of yeast. Fine. Just don't use it. There's yeast in the air. I mean, remember, they said that they left in a hurry so the bread hadn't time to leaven, which takes time. And if you leave bread out, it will leaven dough. If you leave dough out, it will leaven. Because there's leaven in the air. So just don't use the yeast. Leave it alone. It's not the same as having an actual piece of bread that's a starter piece that you're using to leaven your bread with, like sourdough, okay? But Rabbi, I got all this stuff in my freezer. Start eating it. I've been warning you. I tell you every year, my wife, your Rebbitzin, takes our stuff, labels it for a list for us if it's in the freezer, and if it's not refrigerated or frozen, she puts it on the counter. So we can't miss it. And basically we know it means eat this first. Okay? I mean, you should be doing things like that. You should be planning ahead. Don't be going to Sam's Club or Costco and stocking up on a bunch of, frozen pizzas only to be like, uh-oh, it's Passover next week. Okay, part of what Yahweh wants us to be is what I call Chag-centric. Chag. Chag means the feasts, okay? Especially the 3 pilgrimage feasts. He wants us to be centering our lives around the Moedim, around his days. Starting with Shabbat, right? Being Shabbat-centric. Which means that at any time, you should not only know what's going on right now, but what's coming up next. You should know it's 2 weeks to Passover. It shouldn't sneak up on you and surprise you. You should know it's 2 weeks. All right? 2 weeks from yesterday. It'll be Wednesday night in 2 weeks. All right, so there you go. So I gave you a 2-week warning. You should be able to handle whatever you need to eat between now and 2 weeks. Eat it, give it away, throw it out, whatever you need to do. Don't buy more of it. Let's keep that pretty clear. People have asked often about things like, okay, let's understand yeast is not yeast, okay? There's yeast used for cooking. There's yeast that's in alcohol or beer and those kind of things. That's not what it's talking about. It's not the days of unleavened beer, okay? And I don't even drink beer. I'm just saying to make a point, okay? Because you'll look at your chips and say, but it has yeast extract. Well, that's MSG. That's not yeast. which is also problematic. You might not want to eat it. Okay? So it's not that we're looking for. We're looking for yeast as a leavening agent. Okay? And that would be the thing that you're looking for. Now, we're also not going to go in the orthodoxy of Jewish tradition and say that you can't eat any grains or any pastas or any of these things that are also not leavened, but they won't do that during this time. They'll only eat matzah as far as things from grains or things made with matzah meal or some sort of matzah-related thing. That's their tradition. There's no scripture forbiddance of eating grains. Okay? You can eat your pasta as long as it's not leavened. Okay? By the way, there's also breads you can get, tortillas and those kind of things that if you look at them are not leavened. Okay? Don't just go by there flat, but just make sure that it actually look at it and see if it has leavening agents in it. Now, some things can actually be fairly fluffy, so to speak, because they've got baking soda in them. We're not talking about baking soda. As a matter of fact, that's something that if you look at the Jewish community, almost all their unleavened stuff that they make cakes and everything out of is filled with baking soda. Okay? And I would agree that that's not what it's talking about. It's talking about literally the yeast leaven like the starter bread for sourdough. That's what it's talking about. Okay? So anything that's already leavened, eat or throw out, get rid of it, give it away, whatever. Anything that would be used to leaven, we're talking about like a starter lump, that's also got to go. If it's something that's in a sealed bag or in a jar or something that's just literally just a yeast that you would add, which they didn't have things like that in their day. That just store away, just don't make anything with it. All right? And that would be fine. So hopefully that answers most of those questions, okay, as far as the things that you have to worry about with the leaven. Now, although it's a really good meaning it's not a bad thing to do, it's a good practice to literally scrub your house down looking for every crumb. Might even be a spiritual lesson in that. It is not required. It's the days of unleavened bread, not the days of unleavened crumbs. Okay? I mean, if you're sloppy enough that there's literally bite-sized pieces, you might want to clean that up. What I'm saying is you don't need to literally scour your toaster and scour every place to get some people, when I grew up with one group I was with, they literally threw their toasters out and just bought new ones with their second tithe. Like every year, they would just throw the toaster out and buy a new one. They had second tithe for it. They didn't care, right? No, you don't need to do that. Clean these things out the best you can. Don't get too obsessed about it. You will at times. I've done it. Everybody's done it at some point if you've done this long enough. Get through Passover and unleavened bread only to find something you missed. It was stuck behind somewhere or in some cabinet somewhere or something. Or you forgot something in your car or you forgot something somewhere. Do the best you can. Look for it everywhere. The effort is what matters, right? But as far as worrying about every crumb, well, look, you should be worried about them anyway. There's things called bugs and vermin that you don't want in your house, so I would clean that up anyway. All right? But let's not misunderstand, what this is looking for. It's really a physical metaphor for a spiritual cleansing, searching, right? Getting rid of the leaven. Listen to the teachings I did on that. Okay, the main thing with the leaven is what? What did I teach you guys that leaven is? Hypocrisy. So for all of you that are new, they all yelled out sin. No, leaven is not sin. Leaven leads to sin. Okay, it's probably the number one cause of sin, but it's not sin. Okay, leaven is hypocrisy. Yeshua literally said, beware the leaven of the Pharisees and scribes, which he said is hypocrisy. Because the hypocrisy that leads to the sin, the breaching of relationship. Okay, so we have that. All right, what else do I want to cover here? The holy day. It's what's called a Mikra Kodesh, an appointed time. That this kind of appointed time on a holy day, you're allowed to cook. No works to be done. You treat it like a Sabbath, except one exception. You can cook. But you should only be cooking what you're eating that day. You're not cooking for other days. You're cooking what's necessary to enjoy the feasting of the day. All right? So you can't cook on any of the holy days, except atonement, because you're not eating. All right? But you could cook on a holy day. Okay, so we have that. Let's see. there anything else here? Oh, I even have the verse. Yeah, it was verses 43 to 48 that talked about who can take the Passover and who cannot eat the Passover. Okay, we got the Last Supper things. Okay, there it is. All right. So the only thing else I would want to tell you is this. You know, when people look at Passover and look at Yeshua, let's understand what Yeshua, in the context of Passover, kind of connects, what the connection is. Where was he killed? Was he killed in the temple? No. So Yeshua isn't literally the Passover lamb, like in that way. And that's what it's taught often enough. I'm sure your church has taught you that to some degree. But remember, the symbology is about what happened in Egypt. It's the redemption that caused the death to pass over. And so that context makes him our Passover lamb. Okay, not from Passover lamb, meaning he now replaced the actual slaughtering the lambs and all those things, because he didn't do the things that was for, because that was pointing only back to memorial-wise towards the event at Sinai, in Egypt, where death would have been there, killing the firstborn, but they were redeemed by the blood of the lamb. We're redeemed by the blood of the lamb too. All of us, not just the firstborn. And so that redemptive quality connects him symbolically as the Lamb of Yah and the Passover lamb, because it says that he takes the sin of the world on himself, right? Okay, so this is the redemption that Yeshua gives us. So let's kind of connect that together correctly, all right? But he was killed at the same time that they were slaughtering the lambs. Okay, so that is how we also know timing-wise it was not yet the Passover, because nobody else had it yet either, because they were all slaughtering their lambs that afternoon when he was dying. And so that helps you to understand the Last Supper was not the Passover. So what was the Last Supper? Well, I obviously said it was just his Last Supper, but it could have been one of two other things which would have made sense. Number one, there was a tradition, okay, in the Galilean Israelites, the Galilean Jews, to have a thing called the fasting of the firstborn the night before Passover until Passover, and a memorial to the fact that it was the firstborns that had been at risk. So the firstborns would fast from the 13th to the 14th. And so that would have been the same time as the Last Supper. That would have made sense. Because after all, there were a whole bunch of Galileans in his disciples, right? Okay, so that could have been the case. Also, there was a tradition that when you were a teacher, and there was lots of people other than Yeshua running around with students, that when you had a graduation for your class of students, you would have a supper. You would have a meal. Since this was their graduation, so to speak, because he was about to die and then be resurrected, etc., that also could have been the reason for the meal. Okay? It also could have been the reason for the meal. All right, so I hope that answers most of the basic questions about Passover. I did that very simply. If you want the actual verses that make the argument for what I just said, listen to the teaching, Passover Q&A. It's 2 parts. And so that hopefully will clarify quite a bit for you. Now, so the examining yourself part. Let's talk about that a little bit, because we talked about getting leaven out of your house, the physical part, and cleaning your house and that kind of thing. And that's a metaphor for cleaning your house, right? You being that house. 1 Corinthians 6:19, do you not know that you are the dwelling place of the Ruach, of the Spirit, right? The you. All right, so we got to clean house a little bit. So you got 2 weeks to work on that. I don't expect you to get it perfectly clean, just like I told you about the crumbs you might miss. But you should be making an effort to do some cleaning of this house, where the indwelling of the Spirit is, okay? And so what are you going to be looking for? Well, you're examining yourself. You have an example to compare yourself to. Rebbitzin. No, I'm kidding. She is a great example. But you have an example of Yeshua to point to know what that should look like. And so when you look, don't be upset how short you fall. We all fall short of Yeshua. But think about, of the things that you fall short, some of them maybe you can fix a little bit. Some of them you can maybe fix a lot. Some of them at least you can make a stride in the right direction. and start looking at those things. There may be some things you've been putting off, struggling with. When I say putting off and struggling with, I really mean more like putting off, because your struggle is not really a real struggle. That's why you fail. You fail because you're struggling really between wanting to and not wanting to. Well, I want to fix this. Well, but I really don't. And so you struggle. Maybe it's time to take some of those and really want to fix it bad enough that you're going to make some change. Each feast gives you an opportunity. Every new moon gives you all these turning of the pages. Every week, every Shabbat gives you an opportunity to say, this is a starting point. I'm going to stop doing this thing that I've been doing starting today. I'm going to start doing this thing I haven't been doing starting today. All right? Oh, I know what I left out. So there's this thing known as the second tithe. Okay? Now, some of you know what I'm talking about, some of you don't. Listen to the teaching I did on tithing. Okay, it's part of the CC 101, the Covenant Community 101 series. And there are 3 tithes in Scripture. The first one goes to Yahweh. Everybody's familiar with that one. The second one is for you to keep the feast with. I believe it's Deuteronomy 14 explains that. And then the third one, which is also at the end of Deuteronomy 14, it has the third tithe, which is for the poor and the ministry. So it's for the Levite and the poor. Now, so let's talk about the second one. All right? Actually, when I said that we should be making commitments, some of you who have not started your tithing yet or really done it in any consistent way maybe want to start doing that. Commit to do the tithing. This isn't me trying to get in your pockets. I could care less. He'll supply me with all the money we need to do whatever we do from somebody else if it's not you. You're the only one hurting out of this whole deal. It's only hurting you not to do this. Please talk to the people and find out who's tithing and ask them for them. Every one of them will tell you how amazing it is in their life that they're tithing. Especially the second one. Because you know what the second one means? As soon as the paperwork comes out to go sign up for a feast, you've got the money. And you just pay right away. And you don't have to worry about it. Of course, those of you that are telling me that you need time to pay, you're not tithing. Now, I know some of you are on fixed income. Some of you on fixed income, we help. We use benevolence to help you for that. But I'm talking about those of you that are working and have a lucrative generated income. Oh, but Rabbi, I can't afford to take all that money out of my check. You can't afford not to. Besides, one of the things I told you in the tithing teaching is going to expose one of 2 things. All right? If you're not tithing, you're going to realize either A, you have a real bad finance problem that needs to be fixed, or B, you're too selfish to give the money. You're still holding on to like you think it's yours. Okay? That's the only thing that you're going to find out, one of those 2 things. Because otherwise, you're just going to tithe because you have the money worked out, your finances are fine, you're just going to give it. Because I've had a bunch of people telling me, but Rabbi, I can't afford to do this. Well, whose fault is that? No, I mean that. I'm not trying to pick on you. Do you think when he gave the instruction, his expectation was that you should be able to have no problem doing it? So then it's not his fault. I mean, he gave the instruction. It's certainly not my fault. So it only leaves one person left. Okay? He gave you 6 days to work. And by the way, do you know that nowhere does it say that, like when you finish your 8 hours of your day, that you can't go do a second job? It doesn't say that anywhere. Or a third one, or whatever. I mean, most of the time, I work 2 jobs. It's really the same job. It's just in my mind, I'm like, now it's my second shift. I'm still putting in 10 to 16 hours in a day, depending on the day. I don't think I ever put in 8. Because things have to get done. All right? Look, I'm going to say something that's going to get a lot of you mad. Maybe you won't be mad. When you look at this ministry, okay? Absolutely 1,000,000%, the Father gets all the credit, all the glory, all the honor. However, if I didn't work my you-know-what off, this still wouldn't exist. He still needs somebody to do the physical work. Without Moses, nothing happens coming out of Egypt. All the miracles were still done by Yah. It was all his glory and his honor. But if Moses hadn't put all of his 24/7 into it, nothing's happening. Okay? And so I try to set the example for you guys to understand, Because some of you think, well, Rabbi, you have got all this wealth and whatever you've got because, we all send money. I know I have this because I worked my you-know-what off. And that's why this is what it is, because it's in the context of him blessing something for me doing what he wants me to do. It's that I could have done this a lot more lazy. Meaning, I could have just thought, well, I got to do a teaching on Saturday, and maybe, I don't have to counsel, by the way. There's no requirement in Scripture for me to do that. And do you know that I would say easily 99% of it has nothing to do with Scripture? Would you agree, Elder? Easily. Some weeks, 100% of it has nothing to do with Scripture. It has to do with people needing help with their lives, which I happen to have a gift and talent and knowledge for, so I'm willing to do that, but it is not my job to do that. But it is my job to do that from the point of view that's my job, if I can, to bless you and to serve you and provide with whatever I can. So I do that. Because, to get what I give you that way would normally run you $150 an hour somewhere. I'm not making that number up. Go look for counseling out there and life coaching out there and see what you have to pay. Okay? And some of you I talk to multiple times a week. That's more than you make if you had to pay that. I'm just saying, the tithing thing, you need to be aiming higher. Okay? You're not aiming high enough. By the way, if you look out there, the competition almost doesn't exist. Nobody's aiming high. Well, the tiny, you know what they say? Well, the 1%ers? Those are the 1% that are aiming high. Okay? So they earned that. Not a whole lot of 1%ers inherited it. Okay? They made that happen. And how did they make it happen? Because there was nobody to compete with them. I tell the story how when I was a commodities broker, I went down to this firm in Florida, and I stayed there for about 3 days watching what they were doing, and the boss said to me, so what do you think? Do you want to work here? I said, sure, I think I could do that, no problem. He says, what do you think, as far as your prospects? I said, I'll be your top guy in 6 months. The guy said, well, that's pretty cocky. I said, no, nobody's working. I mean, they're just sitting back, waiting for the phone to ring or whatever. Nobody's working. I said, I could beat that in 6 months. I was wrong. It took me 7. Okay? Because I knew my work ethic compared to theirs. Okay? And so that's kind of the thing, Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, talks about, he said, I knew I wasn't the best, this, that, and the other thing. He said, but I knew I could outwork you. You weren't going to outwork me. I was going to work harder, work longer, lift more, do more, train more. I was going to beat you. So it's not always about gifts and talents. It's effort. Okay? And also being efficient in what you're doing. Because a lot of you just sitting there. Think about how many hours you spend in front of a TV. Or a video game. Or your phone just flipping around what you're doing like this. That doesn't pay you anything. All right, back to what I was talking about. So your tithe. I really wanted to get to the second tithe. So the appropriate use of second tithe. This came up a couple of times in the last couple of feasts where I was aware of some things, coming up again with this feast. What can you spend that on? Deuteronomy 14. Let me just read that to you real quick. All right, I'm wrong. It is 14. 14:23. All right, actually 22. 14:22, and you shall tithe without fail all the yield of your grain that the field brings forth year by year. By the way, that doesn't mean only tithing grain. Okay, it's talking about what you did to make a living. And you shall eat before Yahweh your Elohim in the place where he chooses to make his name dwell, the tithe of your grain, of your new wine and your oil, and of the firstlings of your herds and your sheep, so that you learn to fear Yahweh your Elohim always. All right, first of all, a lot of you think I never change. I've changed the position. Not today. I've changed the position. Years ago, I made the argument that when it says the place where he makes his name dwell, once it was Jerusalem, that was it. I don't agree with that thought anymore. Because once I did the teaching, no other name, you understand what name stands for. So it's a place where his reputation dwells and his authority dwells. So that means coming here, if that's where his name dwells, is an appropriate place to be. Because some people say, well, you're not doing it right, you have to go to Jerusalem. I used to say that. I don't think so anymore. But of course, if you go to just anybody that's hosting a feast, doesn't mean his name's there. Got to look for his reputation. Got to look for his authority. In other words, look at what's being taught and what they're doing. All right, next. He says, but when a way is too long for you that you're unable to bring the tithe, in other words, all that grain and whatever your first fruits were, he says, or where the place where Yahweh your Elohim chooses to put his name is too far from you, which doesn't say here that it has to be Jerusalem, but of course it's in Deuteronomy. He says, when Yahweh your Elohim is blessing you, then you shall give it in silver, and take the silver in your hand and go to the place where Yahweh chooses. Now, up to this point, you could be thinking this is the first tithe, but look what it says here. And you're going to use the silver from whatever your being desires, cattle or sheep or wine or strong drink or whatever your being desires, and you shall eat there before Yahweh your Elohim and shall rejoice, you and your household. Wow. See, the first tithe, you're not allowed to do that with. That's the Levites, period. You are not to eat that. As a matter of fact, you have to make a declaration that you didn't mess with it when you give it to the Levite, that first tithe. So here, instead, it says, this one, you could spend it on anything. Feast-related, so that you rejoice before Yahweh. All right, so this is when you buy maybe some clothes that you wear at the feast, that you can also wear on Sabbath. Okay, you can also wear it at the next feast or whatever. So you could buy something that has a primary use. So you're not going to go buy your whole spring wardrobe because you have enough money to do it. You're going to use it for things that if you're not going to wear it on Shabbat or a feast, it doesn't count. Okay? All right. Now, that's number one. Number two, you're not going to go buy a whole bunch of this stuff because they're toys and you have extra money and fun stuff. No, you want to buy good food. Okay? Maybe you want to have good quality beverages. That could include strong drink or wine, but it could be just you want to, have better quality than the junky sodas you've been drinking, whatever. You want to indulge yourself in a feasting. Maybe you want to go and eat, and you don't normally get to eat some nice desserts, and they could be expensive. Whatever it is, it's about celebrating and feasting before Him, living in that abundance of feasting. So let's not just go blowing that money on just anything and everything. Now, you can also use it to get there. So if you have to buy a plane ticket to fly here, yes, that's part of your being able to do the feast. If you need to pay for gas to drive here, then that's also part of the feast. Same thing for going back home. Now, if on your way here or on your way home, you're going to make 14 stops and visit other people, then it doesn't really count except maybe the first leg, okay? Because you're really not just going home. So you're not going to use it for every stop you want to make visiting people. I'm not saying making stops because it's far. I'm saying is if you're going to make all these little side road tracks because you want to go on the way and because it's convenient to stop and do some things, now you're no longer connecting it to the feast. Okay? I would grant you whatever first stop you make. At that point, if that first stop is not home, well then, that point forward, it's on you. That's not for your tithe. Okay? Now, I'm not saying if you stopped at a hotel because it's too far and then you just kept going. I'm saying if you went to go visit somebody or something. Next. So with that tithe, that second tithe, you should have it aside, earmarked, not messed with, because it's for you. So that you can have the funds and not be stressed and think, well, I'm not sure. I have people every year say, well, I don't know if I can afford to come this year. Why? Well, because you're not tithing. That's why you can't do it. If you were tithing, you could do it. And then it's funny because then people want me to support them coming. Where do you think that money comes from? The people that are tithing. I mean, that's the deal. All right? Now, if you are not circumcised, you can use your second tithe for that because it's a feast-related thing. You need to do it to keep Passover. So yes, you can do that. If it takes saving it up for a little while to get there, then that's fine. Save up for a little while to get there. But that would be an appropriate use of the funds. Okay? So let's just kind of make sure that we're not spinning this into something it's not. It should be if a reasonable person that you told you were doing this would say, absolutely see that it's a feast-related thing. Okay? Not because now if you have to explain, justify, and spin it, then it's not reasonable. It should be open and obvious, like, oh, I wanted to get a new pair of shoes for the feast that I'm going to wear at the feast. That's easy. I want to take my family out to a nice restaurant. That's easy. By the way, that also it would include venues that you want to take your children to in town here. You want to take them to the aquarium. You want to take them up to Gatlinburg, because that's celebrating the feast with your family and enjoying a venue. I would say that would be okay too. All right? That's part of the feast. Not on your way to or from and you're going to go stop at like Six Flags somewhere. That's not the same thing. All right? I give you one day in the middle of the feast to go do what you want. You can go do what you want. And use your second tithe to do it and enjoy it. Have fun, you by yourself if you're single or with your family. And then go out and do some things that maybe it's not so easy to do because your budget's a little tight. But you have your second tithe. By the way, some of you have maybe always wanted to have enough money to pay for somebody else's meal. Like instead of always hoping somebody else is picking up the check. Because I don't know about you, but I've been broke enough in life that I was hoping somebody would pick up the check. You ever been there? You're sitting down going, I'm just hoping somebody wants to grab this. How about it would be cool? You reach in your pocket and you go, I got this. It's on me. All right? My first feast, I watched people play games trying to fight for the check instead of fight not to get the check. I mean, people would sneak off, grab the waitress, and pay for it before anybody could know. People would do all kinds of things just to, make sure they get to pay for it. Because they had that money to spend. And they wanted that generosity. They wanted to feel generous and do those kind of things. And so that'll give you that opportunity to know what that feels like. You could take somebody else out and pay for their meals. Of course, if they're tithing, they don't need you to, but it gives you the chance to do that. Right? That feels good. That feels good. I mean, I know I've been out at many feasts where there'll be 15 of us, and one person will have ran off and got the check because they had enough tithe to do that. And it's everybody always, so funny. Some people feel bad. Why do you feel bad? It's tithe. That's what they wanted to do with it. It's their blessing. Oh, but that was a lot because it's a lot to you because you're broke and you're not tithing. Let me put this in perspective. Let's say you're making, this will cover almost everybody. Let's say you're making $15 an hour. Okay? That's $30,000 for the year. Okay? Which is $3,000 to spend at a feast. I think you have enough money that you could take a few people out and pay for your housing and pay for your meals and pay for everything else that you need to pay for. That's if you're making what basically is the minimum most people are making. I'm not saying minimum wage, but most people I know are making at least 15. Some people are making 12, but they'll get back up to 15. But even with 12, it's $24,000. All right, so that's $2,400 if you're a single person. You can't live on that for a week, a couple times a year? I think that you can. Shouldn't be that hard to do. And so, and what if you're actually making a decent living and you're making more like 40, 50, or 60,000. I got 6 or 7 or 5 or 6,000 for the whole year for these. That's plenty of money. Okay? Now your goal is not like, you ever been in a company, some of you have been in enough businesses where your department had a budget and if you didn't spend it, you got less the next time? So you had to spend your budget? This is not the same thing. You don't have to spend all of your tithe. Okay, don't run around frustrated trying to figure out what you're going to spend it on. Enjoy your feast. If you have excess, then that goes in the offering at the end of Sukkot, right after Shemini Atzeret, so that the cycle's over, and you donate that. Enjoy. Don't try to save any necessarily, but don't run around thinking I have to spend it either. Just enjoy. And you'll either have extra or you won't. But don't worry about it. All right? So hopefully that, I think, covered all the things I wanted to cover with this. You know what? I'll even open up for questions. Do they have questions online, Rob, maybe? Or you guys have questions here related to Passover? People can come up if you want to ask. Or Rob, if you got them online. All right, Shama, Steve?
Yeah, I saw a lot of, I don't get on Facebook a lot.
Wait, hold on. We didn't have a camera set up for you yet, Steve. Because I didn't tell them we were doing this. So Chantel's like, wait. As soon as Ryan's got you on there, then you can go. There we go.
Okay. Well, you didn't have to see me anyway, but I've seen a lot of posts regarding.
Wait. We have to see you. Everybody else has to do the same thing. Okay. I mean, if we've got to look at you, they should too. No.
There's been things I've seen. Maybe you could clear up for everybody about how this is the biblical New Year. Maybe you could make it.
Oh, okay. So it's not that it's the biblical New Year. Okay. There are multiple calendars. I was going to actually mention that. When I got distracted when I first was talking about the calendar there. This is the feast calendar, okay, or the counting of moons calendar. There's also an annual calendar of counting of years. That's in Leviticus 25. The counting of moons is Leviticus 23. And so this would be the beginning of the year for feast counting. All right, so this is the first month. He says in Exodus 12, this will be the beginning of your moons for counting moons. In Leviticus 25, they're counting years, and that happens in the month of Tishrei, right after Atonement. It says you'll declare the Jubilee, the Yovel. Okay, so that's why Rosh Hashanah is an appropriate name for the Feast of Trumpets, because it is the counting of years, or the head of the years when you're counting years, the 7-year cycle and the 50-year cycle, okay? And so that would be appropriate. But yes, this is also the beginning of the cycle, or the new year of counting moons, okay? So this is the first moon when we count moons, or months, okay? All right, Ashley?
Rosh Chodesh Sameach, Rabbi.
Rosh Chodesh Sameach.
I want to ask you about second tithes. Is it, I think I might be more extreme on the other way. What happens if I don't want to touch my second tithes at all and just use, because Pesach comes every year, Shabbat comes every year, Sukkot every year. I'd rather just save up the money for it, like it's a property taxes or something.
No, okay, look, you have the second tithe to use. If you don't want to use it, you've got enough money not to need it, that's fine. But I'm just understanding that that's what it's there for. In other words, it's the way of guaranteeing that you have the ability to have abundance for those 3 times a year. Okay, maybe you're living pretty, poor, or whatever the word might be for, you struggle financially, and then at least a few times a year you can have more. Okay, so maybe most of the time, if you go out, maybe you're lucky if you can go out to like a fast food place, and that's all you could afford to go get. Maybe at the cheapest of, maybe you get Taco Bell or something. But what about during the feast? Maybe you can go out and get a steak, or you can go out to a nice restaurant, and you can feel what that abundance feels like. Okay, some place that has cloth napkins. Okay, and they don't want to know if you want fries with it, type of thing. Okay, so if you don't need the second tithe, that's fine. The whole point is it's to assure that you can afford, okay, to do that. Now, you still need to put your tithe away, and then if you want to just donate it whenever you want to donate it, that's fine. But understand the purpose of it is to take away any excuse that you can't afford to come and celebrate abundantly. All right, next.
Okay, because I wanted to give 100% to him. That's where I was thinking.
Well, this one's for you, though. Use it, and if there's excess, then give that when there's excess, okay? But you're supposed to use it.
Okay, and then my next question is, because I talk about this with Michael, and I talked to you about yesterday about Constantine tithing. Are children commanded to tithe? Like, should I make my children tithe? I know he wants to, but the girls.
Look, if they're getting anything that's income, you should teach them to tithe. Okay, because that's going to plant a seed very young that when you get, the first thing you do is take the 10% off, right? So if they're getting an allowance, and really it's not so much an allowance, but they're doing chores, etc., so they're really earning, don't just give your kids something for doing nothing, okay? And really, I wouldn't give your kids anything for doing the stuff they should do. That's like you useless servants. You're supposed to do these things. Otherwise, then they'll be like, well, pay me, then I'll do it. No, you're going to do it because I gave birth to you to do these things, okay? Just like my parents did to me. But if they go above and beyond and you want to give them some money for that, that's fine. But I think you shouldn't be giving them anything for stuff that they should just be doing. Because you're creating a real problem for yourself if you do that. All right? Okay, so you're starting the whole entitlement problem. I understand. I'm just saying don't create early childhood entitlement. Okay? Don't start that process. It is going to destroy them. it'll be bad for them and all relationships with them because they will now be entitled. And that is a really hard place to break someone free out of once they feel entitled. Okay, don't do that. All right, Janet.
Thank you, Rabbi. So, is it okay to, if you feel inspired, to buy somebody a gift that they can use on Shabbat? Is that okay if it's in your heart to bless somebody, or?
Yes,
No.
I mean, look, if you want to get someone a gift with your second tithe, as long as it can be reasonably connected that it's a feast-related thing. Or for Shabbat. Okay, you want to get them a Shabbat gift. By the way, Shabbat is the first of all the feasts. Okay? So if you needed to buy some clothing so you can keep Shabbat, you could use your second tithe for that. It is one of the feasts. Okay? And so that would be something that is certainly a reasonable thing. Again, it's included as the first in Leviticus 23 of the feasts. All right, Steve?
Oh, I just forgot to say something about the tithing. We do pretty good, so I was able to pay already, be number one for Shavuot.
No, you were number 2.
What?
I beat you.
Where's Marlene?
Well, you're the first one to stick it on her desk, but I had it sitting on mine. I just didn't come in when you came in. I filled it out the day before when I
All
first
right, never mind.
put it on the site. So you were second. And I wrote the check. By the way, for everybody out there, I pay too. I made my payment. I did everything, right? So I got the paperwork in. But I hadn't put it on her desk. I didn't just want to leave it out there, so I had it on my desk. But then you came in. You were first, okay? Except for, for me, but you were first.
And we do the third tithe all the time. I've done the third tithe twice, so I'm in year 1 because last year was year 7. So I still have one more year before I got to put it in the box for the.
Yeah. Well, look,
that's a nice saving, by the way.
okay, so what Steve's explaining is I have come up with an idea that I think makes the tithing system work a little easier for you by encouraging you that the third tithe, put it aside every year, but you're only giving it in year 3 and year 6. The other 2 years in between, you're going to be using it as extra savings for things that you would not know. In other words, it's not for just spending. It's because your budget has to be used to not having those 3 tithes. That way you're not going 2 tithes, 3, 2, 2, 3. It gets weird with your budget. But if you take the 3 out every year, your budget feels the same all the time. And it also forces you to put money aside that you could use for a large purchase, get out of debt, retirement, or whatever for the years that's not the 3rd and the 6th year. And so I think that makes things a lot easier for people to have that consistency of putting all 3 aside. You just got to remember that in year 3 and year 6 is when you give that tithe. The other years you use it for whatever you want because it's not really a tithe. You're just taking that 3rd amount out of your check, so you're used to doing it all the time. You're used to living without it. Okay? It's a great habit to have. Okay. Live stream. I can't imagine that after everything I said there's any questions on live stream.
We got a few, Rabbi. Donna Stevens says, Nasi, we only cook enough for the number of people who are attending the Passover meal, so we don't waste much the next day. The leftovers still have to be thrown out. Question.
Okay, that's a good question. I don't know if I even addressed it in the Q&A. I might have. All right, so with the Passover meal as scripturally mandated, that Passover lamb, okay, which we don't do, right? We're not doing that anymore. Okay, now, of course, there may be a time when Yeshua reinstitutes the whole temple service and we do it, but right now there's no temple. So that lamb could not be left over, needed to then be, you had to burn it out. You had to burn it up, okay? It had to be taken care of. We don't have that today. So if you have leftovers, enjoy your leftovers. Matter of fact, a lot of people have food for about a week after Passover, okay? Because it's like the Israelite version of Thanksgiving. Make a ton of food and just eat it for a week. All right, so yes, you don't have to throw it out. You don't waste it. It's because it's not the thing that needed to be handled, which would have been that lamb that was then slaughtered and then roasted. That lamb was not to be eaten any other time but that meal. Since we don't have that lamb, we don't have that problem. Okay, next. It's a good question, Donna. Thank you.
Jennifer Underwood, if you have someone staying in your house while you're gone, should you ask them not to bring in yeast?
Okay. This is a really good question, too. It came up recently, and I'm glad it came up here so I can put it out on record a little bit. You are responsible for your house up until the point when you leave. So some people say, the way the question originally came out was, well, if I'm not going to be home, I'm going to be in Cleveland at the feast with you guys, do I have to do this at my house? And the answer is yes. Your house should be cleaned out. That's point one. Doesn't matter if you're not going to be there. You're still responsible to clean out your house. Secondly, well, what if you have people going to be staying in your house? You're not responsible for what they do either. You can ask them not to do, but you just, as long as you made it right when you left, that's all you can control. Okay? But you can request that they don't. Look, I might be just happy to have someone staying in the house, keeping my house safe. Okay? Because remember, these are not covenanted people and they're not your responsibility. So holding them to that standard only makes sense if Yah required it. I don't think he requires that. He requires you to do what you needed to do to prepare the house before you left. Okay? And then you have them, basically house sitting. It might be if you rented it out to somebody. It's not your house at that point. They could do what they need to do. You can encourage them or ask them not to bring. Look, you may want to ask them not to bring, shellfish and pork or whatever else in your house. And next thing you come home and the place stinks of pork bacon. Because when they fry that up, that smell gets in there everywhere. You may ask for those things. I don't know that you can control that. Certainly don't get upset about it. Okay? Your responsibility is leave your house in the right condition. Okay? That's what you need to do. Okay. Next.
Okay. From Evangeline Agalasso, Rabbi, have been reading the Haggadah, and you mentioned the Passover shouldn't be done alone. Go to a place and go home the next day. What would you do when there's nobody around you? Where will you go?
Okay. So the instruction scripturally is that you would go to the place and that you would literally stay there till the next day. All right, which we're not going to have people stay here overnight in the same room in the building and do all that. Although, maybe we should do that one night, just do a 24-hour midrash after that or something, just, all right? Although then we'll be all shot for the rest of unleavened bread. Unless I make the next day, well, the next day is the holy day. We'll just have to go right through the holy day, and then we'll make the next day free day or recovery day. Sleep day. Look, if you're by yourself, we're in the dispersion. This is not ideally, we're all in the land doing this together, right? So if you're by yourself, use the Haggadah, go through the service, do it yourself the best you can, all right? That's all I can offer you. I would offer, people say, well, why don't you just go ahead and stream it? Because I don't want to do this in a public setting. This is not a public meal. I have considered figuring out a way possibly to give people a Zoom passworded thing, but even that could get shared around and everything else. So I'd rather not do that. What I'd rather you do is you be frustrated and wish you were here so that one day you'll get here. Okay? All right, next.
Okay, from Hunter, what are the quote-unquote ever place we are warning not to do sacrifices at, but only at the house of El? And Deuteronomy 12:13-14. How do I determine that covenant is not broken by donating just anywhere it feels right?
All right. Okay, you have a few confused issues. All right, confused meaning they're actually not connected. Okay, first of all, the every place, he says you're not supposed to go ahead and slaughter in every place that you want, only the places where he has designated for slaughterings. So they couldn't set up an altar just any place. All right, this is not exactly the same as saying the place where I choose to place my name when there is no altar anywhere. He's saying, I've got an altar set up where I want it. You can't just set one up anywhere you want. He designated those places. That's number one. Your second issue, though, has to do with breaking the covenant and donating, which is separate. Okay, the donations are not offerings, like as in the sacrifices. The donations were things made as offerings to the Levite as an inheritance. The tithing was to replace the inheritance. So that was given directly to the Levites. It wasn't offered and sacrificed in the temple. It was just given to the Levites. So the question then is, would I be breaking covenant by donating just anywhere it feels right? Possibly, because you want to be giving it to those that he has anointed to do the work. But this is separate from your first question about sacrifices, because what was given to the Levites was not offerings and sacrifices. It was tithe, okay? Or it was free will offerings just to generously give, like the ones commanded in Deuteronomy 16:16, that says 3 times a year you don't come empty-handed. Okay, that then goes to the Levite. Now, but we don't have Levites today. Well, we have Melchizedekian priesthood today. So you see, Melchizedek got tithes and offerings before there ever was a Levi, before there was even a thought of a Levi, because he and Abram got together, and Abram didn't have his name changed yet, and he gave tithes and offerings to Melchizedek. Okay? So first, yes, every place, he says, don't just do this every place that you may want to do it. That was about sacrifices. Secondly, you should not just anywhere that feels right is not good enough. Okay, I remember talking to people when I first started leading in ministry who would say, oh, well, I give my tithe, I give $5 to this one and $5 to that one and $5. That's not tithing. Those are offerings, maybe. Tithing is your 10% that you give to the priesthood feeding you so that they have an inheritance and don't have to have a secular job to produce, which is what the Levites were given, so they could just do the work of standing before Yah serving the people. And so that would be the full 10%, the full tithe. You don't split that up amongst, well, I like all these different teachers. Good, make an offering to them if that's what you want to do. Okay? I don't know why you'd want to do that. Most of them, if you like their stuff, they're going to sell it to you anyway, and just buy it. That's enough money for them anyway. Where you're being fed, led, counseled is where you tithe. Okay? Where you're being fed, led, and counseled. Look for the cloud, look for the fire, not the cloud like down the road, the cloud, as in Yah. Okay? And be aware that you're looking to give the one who serves before Yah. Deuteronomy 17 talks about the ones who serve before Yah. Okay, so in Deuteronomy 17, and let's see, in verse 12 it says, and the man who acts arrogantly is to not listen to the priest who stands to serve there before Yahweh your Elohim. That's the role of the priest. Well, we don't have any Levites. Well, we have other priests now. You had priests before there were Levites, Melchizedekian priests. Hebrews, the book of Hebrews tells us that we are now dealing with the order of Melchizedek. We're not dealing with the order of Levi. One did not replace the other. They function very differently. When there's a temple, when there will be another temple, Levi will be still doing the temple service. Melchizedekian priesthoods will not. I know Rico gets all upset about this. Rico, if you're listening, I have never taught that the Melchizedekians will be doing anything that the Levitical was supposed to do. But they're doing things that they were never doing. Moses, I believe, was the Melchizedekian representative, and his brother Aaron was the Levitical. And you see the different things that they did, the different roles that they served. So they actually both were working together when there were Levitical priests. And then without a temple, now we're back to just Melchizedekian. But of course, with so many years and years and years of just Levitical, the Melchizedekians sort of disappeared into the woodwork, and people weren't even remembering that they even existed, which is why the writer of Hebrews is reminding them, by the way, there's this other priesthood that had a role outside of temple service to teach and guide and instruct Torah. That's what Moses did, and 70 that he anointed. That, remember, the spirit that was on him went on them. Those who prophesy speak the word of Yahweh with authority. So there was no usurping. There's no disrespect to the Levites. Okay, the Melchizedekians were never doing what the Levites are doing. It's a completely different role. Okay, the Levites had two main roles. Judicial, they were judging, right? They were judges, and temple service. That was the two main roles. The ones out there declaring the word, speaking the word with authority, that was the Melchizedekians. Okay? This is where Jacob most likely had gone to Shem to get training. Okay, it doesn't say that in your Tanakh anywhere specifically. It does a little bit in the book of Yashar, and there are places in the sages that talk about this. But I'm saying that my guess would be that he was the Melchizedek that Abram gave his tithes to. He was also old enough and lived long enough that Jacob certainly could have been trained by him. That would have been Shem. Okay? All right. So hopefully, Hunter, that's a good question. Just it's got a little confused. You got more than one issue kind of in the same question. All right. So how am I to determine the covenant is not broken by donating? Well, donate to. Make sure you're finding an Ephesians 4:11 person to donate to. That person who's serving, standing there before Yah to serve the people, feed them, lead them, counsel them. Okay? Actually, isn't that kind of the stuff that Yeshua said to Peter? Right? Feed my sheep. Isn't that what's going on there? Okay. Are you waving at me for a reason? No. Oh, the baby. Okay, good. All right. I can't blame you. Catherine's baby is very adorable to wave at you. Okay. All right. Next question.
Okay, from Walk Softly Upon the Earth. If we've not had any tithable income in 2023, so funds are low, are we allowed to use some of that money from 2022? And how would we calculate how much to use if it's better food? Use it for better food during unleavened bread.
All right. So, okay, here's, you weren't real clear, so let me just make sure I'll clarify here. If it was from the 2022, because using 2022 and 2023 are really bad designations for the fact that the cycle goes from Sukkot to Sukkot. So that basically it goes across what we call the year date line of January, right? So if you're talking about tithes from 2022, meaning after Sukkot, those are usable for anything this cycle. If it was from 2022 before Sukkot, you should have put it in the box at the end of Sukkot. There shouldn't be anything. You should be zeroed out at the end of Sukkot. Shemini Atzeret, boom, done, start from zero. So when you say 2022, I have to answer it one of two ways. If it's from November, December last year, or anytime after October, after the feast was over, yes, you can use that. It's meant to be used for unleavened bread. Okay? All that time gathering the funds so that you have enough funds to have it. Just like the time between Shavuot and Sukkot. There's a lot of time. You'd be gathering up funds for that next feast. But if this is from 2022, meaning before Sukkot, that money shouldn't be in your pocket anyway. Hopefully that answered the question. All right, now, if your funds are low, call us. We'll help you figure out what you're supposed to do. That's part of the counseling, right? Led, fed, counsel. That's what we do. Or lead, feed, counsel. I'd make a T-shirt out of that, all right? All right, next.
She followed up when you were saying that. Sorry, it was from the end of September to the end of November of last year. So.
All right, if it was before Sukkot, you should have used it up and put it in the box. If you still have it, use it. Just don't do that again this year. Finish up at the end of Sukkot and start again from zero. So yes, if you still have second tithe that you didn't spend on anything else, go ahead and use it now. If you need it, that's fine. But let's understand that's not the way you intended it. Here's the reason. Let's say, in the examples we gave earlier, we'll use like a single person who's making $30,000 a year, and you got $3,000, and you could have kept all the feasts, enjoyed yourself crazy good, and at the end of that, you still have, $1,000 or $500. Okay, let's say that happens a couple of years in a row, and you're just carrying it forward. At some point, you're not going to need any more money to keep the feast, so you're going to stop second tithing. Because you're going to think, well, I don't need it. I got plenty of money. He didn't mean it so that you'd have plenty of, he wants you to have the habit of second tithing. Because it's instructed to do. And so if you were allowed to carry forward, at some point you'd have a problem. Now, I have given, some of you are thinking, well, who gives you the right? Deuteronomy 17. Okay? All right. I have decided or made a right ruling that those who live in other countries that are trying to come here as this focal point of where Yah has got his presence, that they may save their tithe over the end of the cycle with Sukkot, because flying here may cost them their whole tithe from 1 year. Just to come here, let alone fly back and live here and eat and everything else. So they may need more than 1 year to do that. Okay? Because, for example, it's several $1,000s to fly to and from like Australia or New Zealand. We've had people come here from there. It gets real expensive. And so let's just kind of keep that in mind, all right? And so, but that's not something I just gave everybody permission to do. You have to ask. Deuteronomy 17 says when there's a problem, you don't know what to do, and then you ask. And then a right ruling is given to you. Okay? I didn't just make a blanket right ruling and that you're not going to add and write into your scripture somewhere. Okay? I just told you that I've made that situational, ruling for specific people under their conditions. But no, otherwise, the ruling is second tithe finishes end of Sukkot. Starts at 0. All right, next.
Okay, from Breath of Life 74, question, Rabbi, would an adult/child still be considered covered by the parents if they still living at home? Also, would they be able to partake in the Pesach meal if they're not circumcised?
All right, I should have covered that anyway. I'm glad you asked that. I don't want to sound or make anybody think that the Bible is sort of sexist or chauvinistic in any way. The burden starts vertically with the man. Okay? The man covers the family. The man represents the family. So, let me give you several scenarios. The man of the house, the husband, the father of that house, is covenanted and circumcised. With that being the case, all members under 20 and his spouse and all children under 20 are welcome to participate in the meal because they're covered by their father. Again, father is circumcised and covenanted, and then his wife and his children, regardless of what they're doing, can be there to participate in the meal because they would be going out of Egypt with him. He's their covering. Once they turn 20, they need to be covered all by themselves because he's no longer literally their covering. Of course, his wife still would be. Now, let's reverse the situation. The wife's covenanted and the husband's not. All right, the husband can't come. The children can come, though, because she covers them. Remember the vertical structure, husband, wife, children. So if the one above you can come, you can come. Okay? If you're not covenanted, I'm saying if the one above you is covenanted, you can come. If you're the one that's covenanted and one above you isn't, then you're now the top of that chain. You can come and those under you. Does that make sense now? Is that clear? Husband's covenanted, everybody can come under 20 years old. Wife's covenanted, husband's not. Wife can come with the children, husband can't. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, next question. And by the way, I'm very proud of a whole bunch of people, adults of various ages, that have gone out and finally got themselves circumcised. Good job. I'd say that Constantine inspired him, but he's sleeping. He fell asleep. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, from Brandy and Eliana, scripturally, what was used for the tithe in the 7th year when the ground was resting and Israel was living off the abundance from the 6th year?
Okay, so with the Shemitah year, understand that they were also to expect a double abundance on the 6th year. Okay? And so, since we don't have the Shemitah cycle playing out in the dispersion, in the diaspora, we don't have quite that situation. So, what we do with our tithes when we get to, because here we are in dispersion, so you would not be doing, well, you get that extra year for the third tithe cycle, right? So you go 1, 2, third tithe, 4, 5, 6, right? The third tithe again. Then it's 7, 1, 2, and then 3, right? So you get an extra year in there for that. As far as first and second tithe, you're going to need to either do more tithing and putting aside in year 6 or just do the regular tithing in year 7, but otherwise you won't have the abundance you need to do the feasts, and nor would the Levite be fed. So since we're not in the land where he gives a bumper crop, basically, okay, imagine tithing off of twice as much stuff. Then you would basically be having enough for 2 years. But that's not what we're getting today, okay? So you would be in the diaspora, again, it's on me if it's wrong, I would be still doing first and second in year 7, but they get an extra year off of the third tithe until we then get the cycle going in 1, 2, 3, right? Okay? Because you're still going to need the Levite there, and you're still going to need to have the ability to keep the feasts. Because generally speaking, I haven't heard anybody tell me that when they started doing this, that year 6 was double what they had the other years. Okay? Might be a good year, but not double. And so that's basically the idea of the 7-year cycle. Okay? Next.
That's all we have, right, Rabbi?
All right, excellent. All right, well, fantastic. You guys get off a little early tonight since we're going to be back here tomorrow night with our Torah study. So everybody get excited for that. Rebbitzon's going to be walking us through the first Torah portion, Vayikra, Leviticus, right? The first 5 chapters there, and cover the sacrifices. Ooh, there's some good stuff there. So you're going to learn about the 5 different offerings, the different sacrifices. All right, so that'll be tomorrow night. So I want to wish all of you a Rosh Chodesh Sameach. We'll tell you what, I'll come out here and we're going to wave and do that with everybody. So if you want to be on camera, come on this side. He woke up enough to get in front of me here. You awake the whole entire time? Okay, good. That's fine. You can pull right up here. You're good. There you go, Rabbi. All right. Thank you. Just put that in the box for me. All right. Thank you. All right. So we want everybody over here to know, those on live stream, how much we appreciate them being with us. We want to wish them a Rosh Chodesh Sameach, right, which is a happy Rosh Chodesh. We're going to tell them that we love them on 3. 1, 2, 3.